Hey everyone, just wanted to do a quick video to talk about some naming and shading conventions in Desmos and go through that a little bit. And this isn't going to be everything about shading, just sort of basic shading. So one thing to make note of is whenever you're going to shade, you're going to use inequalities and you're going to need some names on your functions that you want to go between. So if I'm trying to shade in between these two lines on the chin here, then I'm going to want some names. So you could put in like Y1, Y2. We'll probably change these here in a minute, but then if I want to shade, I would just put, I want Y2 less than or equal to Y less than or equal to Y1, right? And it'll shade everything in between that bottom function Y2 and that top function Y1. Then I can go back and change the color if I want to change the color. Um, the other thing to note is that um, when you're clicked off of it, the order of the shading and the lines will matter. So if the shading is after the lines, then you'll see it covering up the lines. If the shading is before the lines, then the lines will be on top of the shading. So you do want to keep that in mind sometimes, um, which is why I usually put the shading folder where I put all the shading equations kind of right there um, at the top. So we'll do that in one where we talk about organization a little bit later. For now, I'm gonna change this. So change the names because Y1, Y2 is okay, but if you have 100 equations, right, you're not going to want to name them all 1 through 100 and have to figure out where you're at and stuff like that. So I usually name them after something a little more restrictive. That way, if I want to use Y1 and Y2 later when I'm doing stuff, I can, and not have to worry about it interfering with functions I've already done. So I'm going to say this is um, Y chin 1 and Y chin 2, right? Um, the naming conventions in Desmos are basically you can have an X or a Y, but then nothing else. So you can't really spell out names unless it's in the subscript. So whenever you want to do that, I just put any descriptive parts that I want in the subscript and then it's okay. That's just something you have to be aware of in Desmos is all the naming changes basically happen in the subscripts. So let's go ahead and say this is Y right, chin 2 and Y chin 1. Right, so I'll go ahead and put those in. And I'm going to go ahead and change that from purple to black. All right. The other thing about shading is there's this option for fill at the bottom. If you leave it on the default, then it'll just shade it a little bit, won't shade it completely in. And if you put some shading over other shadings, then they'll overlap and you'll see the overlap. So what I like to do is just change that fill value to 1. That'll make it a solid color, and then anything that you might overlap or put underneath, you're not going to see. So this would just be a fill value of 1, means it's completely filled in. I'm not going to see anything over the top or underneath. It's just going to blend in with that. So if I do come in and put an equation over the top, it would go over the top as long as it's above, right, in the ordering over here. So, but any other shading that I do is not gonna kind of combine and give me different colors that's in there. So that's usually what we want to do. The other thing that I need to know is that I do need to keep these lines, right, because these are definitions. So you might be tempted to say, oh, now that it's shading in between those, I can delete these. But if you delete these, they are going to disappear from, and then it won't know what it's shading between for chin 1 and chin 2. So you do want to keep those, and you don't have to, you can keep those in a different folder, right? So if I want to put these down here in my chin and mouth folder, Hobbs chin and mouth, I can do that, right? Let's go ahead and we got 2 equations down there. We'll go ahead and move that one down as well. All right, so now those are both in that chin and mouth folder that's right there. So Um, and then the shading can be in its own folder, right? So if I add a folder for hub shading, all right, don't need quite that many bees, then we can just drag that right into that folder, and then that will be part of my shading folder. If I unclick it, right, that'll disappear the shading. If I re-click it, that'll make the shading reappear. So this is a good way of keeping your lines wherever you want, but also being able to hide the shading as you work. The next thing we'll talk about is shading with left and right, right? So these are over here on the arm, X functions that I have. So this is an X equals, right, something in terms of Y, X equals something in terms of Y, same thing here. So a lot of times you can get these by using inverse functions, right? If I do this one right here, this red one, that was a rational function, and then I just did it with y equals, and I rearranged the equation to get x equals. So that's one way of kind of getting these guys out. With this one, right, this parabola, this is sort of an x equals, right, y type of parabola. So this will be a sideways facing, that's the blue line, opening left instead of opening up or down. So sideways parabola with that. And all I really did is just switch to x and y, and then I can play with the numbers kind of like usual on that guy. For the purposes of shading, though, we'll just talk about that part. So right now, I have these three functions. Again, I'm just going to call these x1, x2, x3 for now. And then we'll go ahead and shade with those guys. So I want x3 to be on the left. So x3 less than or equal to the x1, right? That, or less than or equal to x, and then less than or equal to x1. So I'll shade everything in between the x3 and x1. Now, there's a little caveat to that. If I zoom in, you can see this x3 function is going a little bit below, and it's not shading to the right of it because I don't have the other function, that green x1 function, defined for that small. So it's not going to shade on that part, so it'll just shade right above here. That's okay, right? So if I want to shade this part right here, then I would need to come up with another function that's the diagonal in between there. And so then I have to make some decisions. Do I want to put in another diagonal line there? Do I want to just shorten this and come up with a really thick line for the arm? So there's a few things you could do, but that's just one consideration to have, is whenever I'm shading either left, right, or up or down, it takes the domain of each of the functions, right? So, and it will only go between those wherever they both have something in common. So wherever this blue line and this green line had values in common. We can also shade, right, this other one. So if I'm going x3 on the left, less than or equal to, this time, x less than or equal to x2, all right? So there's that piece, and if we want to make it black, right, can make it black. So settings, or not settings, over here, settings, and we'll go ahead and make that black. So there's that shading. This is what I was talking about before. If you have some overlap between things and you haven't changed the opacity, then this will look sort of a light black. Here's a light black, and then there's a darker black where they overlap, right? So that's not really what you want. So let's just go back in and change those, right? So that fill we're going to change to opacity 1 on this one, and the fill will change again on this one so that it's a 1. Right? So and now the overlap doesn't matter, right? So everything's blending in the darkest shade of black that we can get on Desmos, and that's it. Right? That's the basics, like I said, the basics of shading, right? And if I want to fill in this part, I would need to define another piece right here. So we'll go ahead and stop that right now for kind of the basics of naming and shading. We'll do a more advanced video in the future where we also look at some piecewise functions and how we can use those for shading. But that'll do it for now, and we'll see you on the next one.